Hi there, it's Will again. You're watching Thoughts I Have. Here's the disclaimer. Alright, let's go. This is part 2 of the 2-part video on the misinformation age and how I think we can go about overcoming it. So, if for some strange reason you missed out on watching the first part, it's mandatory that you watch it before watching this episode. Well, I guess it's not mandatory, but I do recommend it. Anyway, let's kick this video into gear, but not before a very brief recap.
It's the 21st century. Despite there being less war, less disease, less hunger, and more cooperation than ever before in Earth's history, feelings of depression, stress, and hopelessness are at an all-time high. The people want an answer, so they watch the news. They turn to their politicians, their priests, their doctors, their traditions, but all to no avail. For every piece of information they receive, there is information that states the opposite. The overriding sense is one of despair, and it feels like the end is nowhere in sight. What is the cause? Where are these feelings that are drowning humanity in a sea of emptiness coming from?
Alright, that's enough of that. You can go back to the 40s now. What we're trying to say is that it's impossible to prove anything nowadays, not that this hasn't been going on for a while. In 1930, American Tobacco decided to make use of the power of misinformation to sell their Lucky Strikes cigarettes. What they did was send out cartons of Lucky Strike cigarettes to doctors, along with a letter that asked if they thought that Lucky Strikes were, quote, less irritating to the sensitive and tender throats than other cigarettes, unquote. They also noted in the letter that a good many people had already said that Lucky Strikes were less irritating. They didn't bother to say who those people were, but, they didn't need to. Unsurprisingly, with help from the extremely biased question, the overwhelming response was,
by golly, I guess your cigarettes are less irritating.
So, when it was revealed that cigarettes were actually the cause of the spike in lung cancer that was happening at the time, it's not too far-fetched to say that a few people were kind of mad with their doctors. Back then, the debate was on whether or not cigarettes were safe. Now, we've moved on to vaccinations and water fluoridation. What hasn't changed is the fact that, on both sides, there are groups with contradicting pieces of evidence. And thanks to what I talked about in the last episode, specifically groupthink and the echo chamber, no matter what one side does, they are unable to change the other side's opinion. Because of this, they're stuck in an argument that won't end until either A, a whistle is blown, the truth comes out, and the against side wins, or B, the for side wins by actively censoring and stamping out the voices of the against side. At least, that's how it's gonna go if a solution isn't found beforehand. That solution is what this video is about, but before we get to that, there's one last thing I want to talk about. Conspiracy theories, or more specifically, where the term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist came from. The reason I want to talk about this is because it's my belief that until we defang the term conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory, we're going to be shutting down a lot of potentially important conversation. Conspiracy theories are typically thought of as being one of the largest and most prevalent sources of misinformation. Being branded a conspiracy theorist is one of the worst things that can happen to you. Why? Well, because it immediately ostracizes you from society. It places you on the fringe. You're now one of the weirdos, and the only people who are going to listen to you are other weirdos. For many people, it's a death sentence. Friends, family, career, all gone. Because you're a conspiracy theorist. But where did the term come from? If you haven't heard the story before, you're gonna find this interesting. On November 22nd, 1963, at 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, America was rocked by a single gunshot. The sound signaled the death of President John F. Kennedy. Around an hour later, the shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald, was arrested for the murder of the president. 2 days later, Oswald was also shot dead by Jack Ruby during his transfer from the city jail to the county jail. 1 week later, Lyndon B. Johnson established a commission to look into Kennedy's assassination. After a year of work, the commission, which was led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, concluded that the alleged gunman, Lee Oswald, had worked alone and that there was no conspiracy involved. Unfortunately, the report failed to convince a good many people. It was at this point that the theories which had already been floating around started becoming more prominent. It wasn't a lone gunman anymore, like the Warren Commission said. Now it was a plot involving multiple gunmen and large, organized groups, such as the Soviet Union, the Mafia, Lyndon Johnson himself, or even the CIA. Now, this is where it gets good. In 1967, 3 years after the Warren Commission was released, the CIA released a classified dispatch that coined the term conspiracy theory. This is just a piece of that dispatch. From the day of President Kennedy's assassination on, there has been speculation about the responsibility for his murder. Although this was stemmed for a time by the Warren Commission report, various writers have now had time to scan the Commission's published report and documents for new pretexts for questioning. This trend of opinion is a matter of concern to the US government, including our organization. Just because of the standing of the commissioners, efforts to impugn their rectitude and wisdom tend to cast doubt on the whole leadership of American society. Conspiracy theories have frequently thrown suspicion on our organization, for example by alleging that Lee Harvey Oswald worked for us. The aim of this dispatch is to provide material for countering and discrediting the claims of the conspiracy theorists, so as to inhibit the circulation of such claims in other countries. Shortly after, the word conspiracy became bad juju, and if you had conspiracy thrown anywhere in front of your name, you were instantly thought of as insane. Now, I'm not saying that any of the theories regarding Kennedy's assassination were valid. I don't know, and so I'm not going to comment. What is clear, however, is that the term conspiracy theorist was weaponized to help the CIA get a handle on the growing distrust that people had in the government, which is absolutely understandable, but at the same time, it's shut down a lot of reasonable discussions. If it's not following the official narrative, it's no longer okay to talk about it. You become a conspiracy theorist, and your voice is silenced. Why is this dangerous? Well, let me give you an example. Let's say it's the 60s and there was a theory going around that the American government was going to commit acts of terrorism on its own citizens as an excuse to start a war with Cuba. Say we were having a conversation and that came up. You'd probably call me insane. Except, I wouldn't be insane. Operation Northwoods was a proposed false flag operation against the Cuban government back in 1962. In short, the plan was for the CIA to commit acts of terror on Americans, as in hijacking planes, blowing up a US ship, and orchestrating violent terrorism in US cities, blame Cuba, and use it as an excuse to start a war. Now, Kennedy rejected the idea of Operation Northwoods, but that was Kennedy. He's not around anymore. What if we've got a leader who doesn't care about the country's citizens as much? A leader who actually wants war? What if Operation Northwoods 2.0 goes ahead and the truth can't come out because everyone who even suggests the truth is branded a conspiracy theorist? See the problem? If the terms conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist keep getting slapped on anybody who doesn't support the official narrative, instead of quelling fake news and misinformation, the possibility is there to be shutting down the truth. Now, this poses a pretty big problem. How are we going to determine what is and what isn't misinformation? I'm constantly hearing about how Facebook needs to regulate its website better and make sure that fake news and misinformation aren't allowed on its platform. Hopefully, after hearing what I've just said, you can see why that becomes a problem. Is Facebook now the arbiter of ultimate truth? Do they determine what is ultimately false and what is accurate? If so, that's pretty freaking scary. I mean, what's stopping the government or any other large organization from saying to Facebook, "Hey, that story being published about us? Yeah, it's fake news. So if you could shut it down, that'd be great. Here, we've even got this super shiny $1 billion check for you, just to keep things quiet." Needless to say, I'm not a big fan of that solution. I feel that there are far too many things that could end up going wrong. So, what's the answer then? If we can't just erase the fake news, what can we do? My thought is that the issue of misinformation that we're experiencing today is symptomatic of a bigger issue. By censoring and getting a stranglehold on fake news and conspiracy theories, we aren't solving the source of the issue. We aren't getting the weed's roots, we're cutting off the leaves. It has the possibility to become enforced groupthink, and I think most of us like to have control over our own thoughts and feelings. So, what is the fix? Well, it's not easy, but I figure I'll mention it because, as far as I can tell, it's the only thing that'll work. What I believe we need is a fundamental shift in the ethics and morals of the world at large. Yeah, I know, right? Might as well ask me to jump over the Empire State Building, but just give me a minute. I recently found an interview that Jordan Peterson did with Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein, where he talked about something very, very similar. The link to the video is in the description. Referencing postmodernism, Jordan says in the interview,
and that's why the postmodernists say, well, you can't agree on a canonical interpretation of a great piece of literature, because the number of potential interpretations are infinite. And so then they say, well, why should we settle on any one interpretation then? Why should we privilege one over another? And then they say, well, that's all power games. And so that's you got to take that seriously. But what they missed, and this is a big deal, it's a big deal, I think, is this idea of ethical constraint. It's like, yes, there's a landscape of potentially infinite interpretations, but hardly any of them will work in the real world. And hardly any of them will work in the real world in a way that doesn't get you killed by other people or doom you because of your own stupidity to failure across time. And so the landscape of interpretation is almost infinite, but the landscape of applicable interpretation, functional interpretation, is unbelievably constrained. And I think that constraint system is what we regard as ethics. It's something like that.
In other words, is it functional for me to believe that Australia doesn't exist? Does that opinion do anything for me or society as a whole? No? Then throw it out and find a different answer. The issue with this solution is that, obviously, it doesn't take into account exactly how people are going to come to those ethical conclusions, which is, kind of important. And before you say anything, no, I don't think the answer is communism. Reading about it in school was plenty for me. I have no desire to live it. I'm also not suggesting groupthink where everyone agrees because they want to get along. What I'm suggesting is a personal investigation of the truth. A world where people actively search for answers, and where they never stop searching because 99% of the answers out there are evolving and changing. Now, if ethics, like Mr. Peterson mentioned, is regulated by what is applicable and functional, that means that there is an ethical baseline out there somewhere, which means that with enough intelligent research and searching, people should come to the same conclusion on their own, instead of just believing it because they're told to believe it or because they want to fit in. Once that baseline has been found, people can compare the conclusions they come to with their ethical baseline to see if their conclusions are valid or not. Think about it. That's how it's always been done anyway. Scientific discovery works by trying something, seeing if it works, and then making adjustments based on the results. No self-respecting scientist, or anyone for that matter, is going to hold on to something that can't stand up to scrutiny, unless they're really stubborn. If a blacksmith sees that using a bellows is more effective at heating up iron than just blowing on the fire, is he going to keep blowing on the fire? Of course not. Well, maybe he is, but then he wouldn't be a very good blacksmith. What he'd probably do is start using the bellows because he found they worked better than his old method, and he can now begin making adjustments to his new system to make it work even better. Now, before you say that ethics isn't an unchanging concept, I realize that, and that is exactly why we shouldn't stop looking. The moment we feel we have discovered ultimate truth and stop looking is the moment things go sideways, because if we stop checking and seeing if new information is functional and applicable, we're going to stop making progress forward. The challenge is inspiring people to actually do the research and go investigate the truth for themselves, and that would take a miracle. Or maybe not. What if everyone watching this video decided to take the truth into their own hands and started doing their own research? Instead of accepting what other people and articles and the rest of the world say at face value, what if we started looking under the surface? What if we maintain a healthy sense of skepticism in all things so that when a new idea presents itself, we don't just accept it or shun it blindly because everyone else is doing the same thing? What if, instead, we enacted our own personal investigation of the truth and then had intelligent, open consultation about our findings in order to create a solid base to continue building on top of? The open, honest, humble, and reasonable search to define what is true and accurate and what is false and inaccurate inevitably will lead to faster progress and happier lives for everyone who is engaging in that act. After all, we're no longer submitting to the will of the masses and giving up our sense of control and free will. We're no longer leaves in the wind. We're taking our lives into our own hands and discovering what truly works and what doesn't. And over time, people are going to start to notice. They're going to wonder why you're so much happier and secure in your view of the world, why you don't go to bed at night wondering what the meaning of it all is. You might tell them that it's because you don't take things at face value, and that you know that the meaning is out there somewhere, and that if you just keep looking, you will inevitably find it. Hearing that might inspire them to do the same, and then they might inspire someone else, and then that person might inspire 2 people. Over time, intelligent discussion could become the norm, and we would start to burn through the problems afflicting the world today faster than you can say lickety-split, because instead of fighting and bashing one another's opinions because we're not willing to let those opinions go, we're working together with the common goal of finding the truth. And if that means changing our beliefs, so be it, because in the truth, there is peace. In discord, there is only chaos. Or we could just say, your mom gay, and have that be the end of it, though I don't see that working out in the long run. Alright, that's enough from me. If you didn't like the video, gently press dislike, but if you did, give the like button a poke and press subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. It all supports the channel and what I do. I hope you found this video helpful and that it gave you some different perspectives to run over in your mind. And if you do have any thoughts of your own, please do leave a comment and let's get a discussion going. I do read them and I'm always looking for new perspectives and viewpoints. What I share in these videos are just thoughts I have, not facts. As always, I hope your today is at least a little better than your yesterday, and I bid you farewell and adieu.